It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Hi, it's Feedback Friday. And I'm in a lot of pain again. My jaw went again on Thursday. People saw me on the Twitch stream. I was like, dig. So if I'm somewhat off my game right now, that's why, and I apologize. So instead of just going through comments and trying to remember them, I actually copy-pasted them into a Word document today, so I didn't screw this up too badly. A lot of people said some really nice things in the comments, and I guess I'm just in sort of battle mode right now with all the sort of, I'll say, bizarreness that's going on right now, dealing with a lot of odd aggression that I was sort of like, oh, at the nice comments. So thank you for that. One person said, can we clone you? How do you know I'm not already cloned? No, I'm just kidding. I don't want to throw anybody off too much. But the comments on the there were a lot more comments on the hot take video, which is not surprising. But there were also a lot of comments about the sort of Ghost of Tsushima Last of Us 2 comparison that I found interesting in the different theories about what happened there. And I just realized my mic was too low. Sorry about that. What happened there and why people seem to be so invested in being Last of Us 2 good, Ghost of Tsushima bad. And I got to admit, there's a strange bias against Ghost of Tsushima. I mean, the engine is a little dated. That's the only real criticism I have of it. If you do a lot of exploration, you get a lot of the combat leveling up done fairly early. That's the reward for exploring. Yes, the game gets easier. That's kind of the, but I get why they wanted to make it so that somebody, if they just wanted to do the main missions, if they just wanted to play, the game based on the movies, they could do it and make it through. This is not a From Software game. This isn't a Souls game. This isn't Sekiro. It's designed for people to just enjoy in a chill way. And now they've patched, lethal difficulty. So if people find it too easy, they can up it. I mean, I admit, if I wasn't playing on Twitch and keeping one eye on a chat, yeah, I'd find it on the easy side. And the assists in regular combat that you get from the stances mean you get into some boss fights. And I was like, oh, wait, I got to remember. I totally lost my my parry timing. But, that means there is some difficulty in certain critical fights, right? Like, it's not completely lacking in difficulty like, the original BioShock was, for instance. So, and I don't think it's a game that's intended to be difficult. It's a game that's intended to be fun and pretty, which is a different objective. So, I don't even have the issues with the camera that other people do. I find the camera as part of tactics, but, so essentially, like, if I can tell you things that are just not, as a video game, not good in The Last of Us 2. Other than a somewhat absence of difficulty, which I think was a deliberate choice, I'm really having a hard time criticizing Ghost of Tsushima as a game. And this is when I kind of go like, why am I so different than the bulk of reviewers out there, the bulk of like the smart people writing about games out there? And that's the point where I kind of go, I don't care. I don't care why I have a different opinion. I have a different opinion, right? And I think that's my theory is basically, and I'll read some other theories because I think it's interesting to hear what other people think about it. But My theory is basically that with certain games, certain extremely hyped games, um, reviewers don't want to be the one person who is outside the pack, right? Because then you get targeted, essentially. Instead of it going, all right, that one person didn't like what we did this time. And it's hard when somebody doesn't like what you do. I mean, I don't want to make it seem like I don't understand why it's upsetting when someone just cannot stand what you did. And I'm very careful to not be too critical of things because of it. I need a basis for the criticism other than it's not my thing. I'll say it's not my thing. Grand Theft Auto is not my thing. I get bored in those games. That doesn't mean the games don't do what they do well, though. Okay, Grand Theft Auto 5 came out a while ago, so we can't compare an open world game that just came out to a game that came out a while ago. I would argue that Ghost of Tsushima handles sort of open world and making the world feel populated and making like one thing flow into the next much better than Grand Theft Auto 5 did. But again, you can't compare a game that came out a few years ago to a game that just came out, right? They've learned in the intervening time. Grand Theft Auto 5 is one of those games where I intellectually see the achievement. It's just, I don't like the themes. I don't like the characters. I don't like, just there's nothing in it that I like. I'm a Saints Row fan. That's different than the weird attacks on Tsushima. And the only thing I can think of is that because they weren't really authentic with their comments about Last of Us 2, they're in like a spiral now, right? That they have to find something wrong with Tsushima so they don't have to admit to themselves that they were wrong about The Last of Us 2. And that usually speaks to something regarding identity. Something regarding identity in the person who is being illogical or irrational about something. And this is where I get to the comments because it was interesting. Lou Likes to Watch said that after playing Ghost of Tsushima, I've fallen in love with Jin and his story. I appreciate the journey he went on, and I love seeing him change as the story progresses. And I've come to realize something about The Last of Us 2. Last of Us had a hero, but Neil killed him off. Joel was not a perfect person. He was flawed, but he was still viewed as a hero figure that we could relate to. Most stories need a hero of some type. Last of Us 2 has no heroes, nor will it have any again. And, I mean, the anti-hero archetype is a thing. Hi, Scouty. You can have a main character in a story where, the protagonist does not have traits normally associated with heroism. Here's the Scout. Why weren't you on Twitch? Eh? Why didn't you come to Twitch yesterday? Yeah, I love you too. That happens. I mean, in comics, Wolverine's the shining example of sort of an anti-hero. We're still sort of, rough around the edges, heart of gold kind of thing. You can even tell stories sometimes. The semantics of the idea are telling the story from the point of view from the villain. Again, I think that's kind of more anti-hero territory or a Byronic hero. But, it can be done. It can be done. And I mean, we were talking on Twitch about how I really liked playing as the Arbiter in Halo 2. Of course, he was the main antagonist of the first game. But it's this idea that The Last of Us 2 has no hero, I think goes deeper than that. I think that the real issue with that game was not that there was something necessarily wrong with wanting to tell a challenging story. The issue was that the structure was absolutely a mess. And so there's something to that there is no hero. whose story is this in that game, right? Like, it's not Ellie's, really. And it's not Abby's, really, because Abby isn't playable until, like, 10 hours in. And, like, whose story is this? What journey are we going on? Neither of them evolve terribly much. It's just a bunch of stuff that happens and then everyone goes their separate ways. And to me, that's where it fell flat. Now, Ghost of Tsushima very much is this big epic battle against this, young samurai and, sort of a Kurosawa villain. And there's a lot of themes of things, play the game. But a few people have commented on the uncle and how critical the uncle is of Jin's tactics, no matter how honorably you play. And people have said that's a mistake or it's dissonant. It's interesting because I took it a different way. I took it as one of the themes that no matter what Jin does, it's never gonna be enough for that guy. And that's one of the, like, Kurosawa explored mentorship and flawed mentorship and things like that. But I don't think, my read on it was ever going to be enough for Jin's uncle. It was always going to be dishonorable because he didn't do things exactly the way the family has always done it. And if you got a family like mine, that rings true to you. Yeah, I mean, it's a fair comment that people struggled with that. I can just find a way to justify it. But I do think it's interesting that even people who really love the game have said that that was one element that kind of hit them the wrong way. And that's how it works when people, like, bring their own experiences into stuff. But that's a cool conversation point. Like, it's not telling people that the game is Orientalist. And I'm glad that another commenter called out that comment from one of the hot take articles, that it was actually a misuse of the term Orientalism. Orientalism originally was not, I mean, it's been applied to Asian cultures as well, but it was originally sort of applied by a scholar named, I always get the first name wrong, Edward Said. And it was about Middle Eastern people. And it was how, like North Americans, essentially, white people treated people from the Middle East as these sort of, like, kind of savages. And it was, in Said's argument, it was used by writers in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries to justify colonial conquest. The commenter who brought this up was Ruari Myler. Sorry, the font's very small, and I'm having trouble with my eyes if I misread or mispronounced your name. So it doesn't apply here. Now, we know that because we played the game. The whole point was that the person who wrote that article, who apparently does use the she pronoun, so I was okay there. But the person who wrote that article hadn't played the game. So she didn't know that. So she just shut her mouth off. But, it's like, well, I'm just expressing my opinion. And that's why I start going, maybe this is why I'm different. Because I don't necessarily feel like my knee-jerk opinion is worth anything other than it's my opinion. This is what I thought about it. This was my expectations. This is why I'm interested or not interested in playing the game. And that's valid from a perspective of I'm interested or not interested in playing the game. But if I haven't played the game and there isn't, like, some, even if there's some moral stance against the company, I won't spend the money. I don't feel right necessarily telling anybody else they shouldn't spend the money. That's a decision that they should make for themselves. Like, inform people, let them know of particular issues, let them know what choice I'm making. let people make up their own bloody minds, right? Another comment, Kaiser Schnitzel, which is a great screen name, said complaining that Kurosawa films are not historically realistic is like complaining that Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is not historically realistic. I thought that was really funny. Another commenter, Sterling7, said, can you imagine someone going, who does this Kurosawa think he is to reinterpret Macbeth? And was there even a single British person involved in this production? Like, and that a lot of people, they pointed out the thing about objectifying women versus objectifying men, and how there is this sort of double standard, and people claim it's because of, you know, a history of oppression or whatever. And that's, you know, that's not a sound first principle. Something happened in the past, so something's wrong now is not a sound first principle. That's okay. You can understand a person's sensitivity there, but determining the morality of something, as opposed to just sort of taste or politeness of something. No, you can't go, well, this person had a different path than this person, therefore this person has a right to a certain amount of dignity, where these people over there don't. That's the exact same argument that during the age of colonial expansion was used by white people to justify, and you know, other people, but we focus on it being white people, that it was good for people to be put under the boot heels of, you know, expanding European colonization, because they're going to be civilized now and they don't have to worry about their affairs. The you know, rightful rulers are going to make all the decisions for them. They can just relax. Oh no, wait, we can't. They can't. We've enslaved them and we're forcing them to work. And that's the problem with that argument. If it's, you know, if it's okay to depict one group of people in one way, then it should be okay to depict another group of people in one way. Now, the exception to that, of course, is if you're always depicting a group of people one way, or if there was a particular stereotype, no, you got to watch that, because the principle of stereotypes are an issue, right? That applies to everybody, right? You know, the whole bad British teeth thing is a stereotype. I know lots of British people who don't have bad teeth. That's just an example. You know, sometimes you can play a stereotype for laughs if it's an in-joke, like if it's people from that culture making the joke. And why? What's the first principle? That's a double standard? No, it's not. A person from inside a culture can balance the poking at the stereotype without validating the stereotype in a way that a person less familiar with a culture can't. Now, does that mean that people should just keep to their own kind and never create a character from a different place? No, of course not. Right? Because, you know, first of all, that's going to create very homogenous media. Second of all, we still don't have diversity in the C-suite in a lot of media. So the only way we're going to get representation at the highest levels is if some white person champions something involving a person who's not white, thus risking getting accused of cultural appropriation. This is what's so wrong about this whole approach. They claim that they understand that there is white privilege and systems of oppression, but then they claim this cultural appropriation thing, which basically means that no white person can include anything that's not white, which, of course, we have a problem here. We have circular logic that's just going to perpetuate the status quo instead of moving things forward. You know, in my projects, am I going to put characters of color in when I can? Hell yes, I am. You know, am I going to hire people who are different from me? Hell yes, I am. And if they have an idea that's appropriate to their culture, am I going to go, no, we can't do that because I'm the most high profile person on this and I'm going to get accused of cultural appropriation? Hell no, I'm not going to do that. Like, no. This is a person coming with an idea that reflects their culture. That's cultural appreciation, not cultural misappropriation. And the thing about cultural appropriation is it happens all the time. You know, if you're not French and use a fork, that's technically cultural appropriation. People go, oh, but that's white culture and white culture. You know, to go back in history to, you know, the history of Europe, there was a time where the English and the French were like dire enemies. There was a time where Spain was not considered a white country. Just saying. Another comment was, I chuckled at this because it's The Sims. Midnight Grind said, you know, speaking of odd double standards, here's one I found interesting. Why are male power fantasies demonized when games like The Sims are deemed perfectly fine? Aren't you playing God in The Sims? Isn't that a power fantasy in the truest sense? I know this isn't something you've ever brought up specifically, but I think it's funny that people are so quick to tear down one idea while another is accepted as the norm. That is part of the reason I hate The Sims. It's playing God. Like, I personally am horrified. And you guys have seen the Blood and Guts games that I play, right? But Blood and Guts games are usually one person taking on a horde, really outnumbered. It's like an underdog narrative. Whereas The Sims are people who gleefully tell me about they created this like simulation of domestic bliss and then found some way to horribly kill their Sims. And I'm just like, and it's exactly that. It just seems like so playing God. And I, you know, intellectually, I say there's nothing wrong with it. People know it's not real. But on a gut level, it just bothers me so much. Things you learn about me. Jolly Yellow said, I'm completely convinced that shitty and salty takes are a defensive Last of Us 2. This is shitty and salty takes or Ghost of Tsushima. This is going to continue to happen for every major release for the rest of the year. The complaint wasn't that people were sexually objectified, but that women were being sexually objectified when I said that if it's not okay to do to a woman, it's not okay to do to a man. And this came up in the comments a lot, the specific thing about sexual objectification. And even the academic, Martha Nussbaum, who like codified the idea of objectification and sexual objectification, even she said, sometimes it's okay. Sometimes it's fun. It's not always bad. Just keep it in bounds. And yet, for whatever reason, the people who claim to have learned this theory leave out that part. It's a great lever of power, isn't it? When you can control not just the sexuality of women, but in some ways the sexuality of everyone, because you're claiming to condemn male sexual desire by stifling female sexual expression in one fell swoop, right? I guess the only people who are allowed to have any sex urge anymore are non-binary people. Another person said, where was the outrage? Who's this commenter? So it's right on the jump. Louisa Toll said, where was the outrage like this during Black Panther's premiere? There wasn't any African nationalities. Yes, there are nations in Africa. Credit as a writer or creative director, both Ryan Coogler and Joe Robert Coe are American. You can't weasel out of this by saying they were black, as that's racist according to woke standards. And it's interesting because they put the American guy in as the villain in that film. I thought that was kind of interesting. Some people argue that Wakanda is not a real place. There were a lot of actors of Nigerian descent there. I don't know if there were any Nigerian nationals cast. I know there were definitely some people who were born in Nigeria. So there was some representation, but yes, at the top tier, it is correct. The people who created Black Panther were not African. So there you go. And of course, it would not be a Feedback Friday without a comment from Oron Darklord. Um, and he addressed this idea of, and it's interesting, I didn't consider this, that there was a lot invested in The Last of Us 2 being the swan song for this generation of console, like the high note, right? And Ghost of Tsushima came along and kind of stole its thunder. Now, the one detail against that is the fact that both these games were supposed to be out earlier than they were, especially Last of Us 2, extremely delayed. But yes, they were setting up this narrative that they definitely set up the narrative. I will give that The Last of Us 2 was the capstone on the PS4 era. And then Ghost of Tsushima shows up with dated tech, you know, a really good game design and a lot of earnestness, and kind of steals the thunder. And I can see how some people would feel uncomfortable with that. That doesn't make them right. And, you know, Oron postulated that the people who are really championing The Last of Us 2 and are crapping on Ghost of Tsushima, and this is not people, not just people, if you like the game, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the people who are cheerleading The Last of Us 2 specifically on what they think the politics of the game are. And, you know, just demonizing Ghost of Tsushima because it's not quote unquote woke. I'm very hesitant to use the term woke because that term itself is cultural appropriation. Wokeness used to be specifically about Black workshopping, consciousness workshops in Black America. That it specifically applied to that. So the fact that a bunch of white people have kind of taken the term and applied it to anything kind of political correctness kind of thing, that's not what it meant. It's specifically for Black people, and we took it. So I am very cautious about using that word. I only really use it ironically. But Oron said, they constantly seem to be of the mentality that they're one big win away from final ultimate victory in the culture war, and their precious right side of history keeps getting yanked away from them. It's the whole Leia quote, the more they tighten their grip, the more hobbies and subcultures slip through their fingers. But they don't learn because they have the power, and so their response to setbacks is always to imagine they can win the next time if they just abuse that power even harder. And the root of that is the fact that this particular flavor of culture war originated on college campuses, which are not the real world, and people can control through just sheer noise, if you will, in a way that it's much harder to do out in a less contained environment. He continues, but at this point, I think they're coming to grips with the reality that The Last of Us 2 sales are cratering and the game might not even make money, and certainly won't be the kind of smash success they expected it to be. That, compared directly to its predecessor, will be a huge example in favor of get woke, go broke, rather than against it. That word of mouth and public opinion has, by and large, irrecoverably turned against the game. They'll try to cover it up, make excuses, insist they somehow won anyway, or necessarily brazenly reverse their narrative and throw The Last of Us 2 and Druckmann under the bus trying to get out of it. But deep down, they know they lost this round and it'll come back to bite them. And they're absolutely seethingly furious. And then here's Ghost of Tsushima, this little game that could, on course to chug along past them, and it, rather than The Last of Us 2, will become the game that's seen as defining the identity of gaming at this moment in time, as this console generation wraps, adding imaginary insult to self-inflicted injury for them. And that kind of stuck a pin in where I think I broke away. One, I've been doing this a long time. More importantly, I'm one of the few women that has been doing this a long time who's still here. And the game that broke me in terms of being a part of this herd was Heavenly Sword. I played Heavenly Sword, and I thought Heavenly Sword was a gloriously beautiful game. Yes, it was short because they hadn't figured out how to optimize PlayStation 3 titles yet. But there was a lot of replay value. It was that kill with skill concept that never quite worked, but I really liked it. But the example of early amazing motion capture acting, the concept was fantastic. The world was beautiful, and critics were way too harsh on that game. Overwhelmingly male critics were way too harsh on that game. And all they could say is, well, it's short. It's like, okay, it's short, but did you like it while it was, even though it was short, you know? And, well, yeah, but it was short. That was the politically correct thing to say about a game back then. It was short. Meanwhile, they were giving shooter games like Halo and Call of Duty like 10 out of 10, even though their campaigns were super short, but they had multiplayer. That game got robbed. That game did not get the credit it was due. There were a lot of other early PlayStation 3 titles like Folklore that didn't get the credit it was due because everything was Xbox 360, Xbox 360. At that point, I'm sitting here going, something is really wrong. You know, this is a game with a female playable character with a really cool combat system. Yeah, okay, it's short, but if that's the only bad thing you can say about a game, seriously? And that kind of, you know, it's sort of a red pill thing, for lack of a better term. You can never unsee that again. And so I don't worry, because then, you know, as the years went on, people were like, yeah, people were really hard on that game, as if they themselves were not a part of the group that was really hard on that game. And I saw the way they rewrote history in that regard, that they pretended they were never on that bandwagon that drove over a particular game. And so I think the opposite's going to happen with Last of Us 2, the same way it kind of happened with games like BioShock Infinite, Skyrim, any other game you weren't allowed to criticize at the time. People will pretend they never really thought that way when it's acceptable to say they never really thought that way. And they will eventually jump on the bandwagon that Ghost of Tsushima is awesome and fun too, because they hope that people will forget the position they took. Because in those circles, everybody forgets past positions because nobody wants to be called out on past positions, because then the whole thing just sort of falls like a house of cards, right? There is a cultural element to this. I'm not going to deny that. I'm just saying stuff that isn't just culture war. But Oren goes on. And so consequently, they're going full spite-driven rage, trying to find anything to hit Ghost of Tsushima for and turn the narrative against it. And that's not easy for them to do. The female characters are very good, and the game played it safe in terms of how they look. The game is entirely about people of color. There's no clear vector of attack here from their usual social justice playbook without making arguments that are going to sound laughable to most people, which they did. But they're too angry right now to pick their battles and realize this ain't the battle to pick. So they're making arguments that sound laughable. There you go. Anything that takes to lower scores, generate negative press, and maybe, they hope, slow down sales. All just out of sheer spite and desire to make sure that if they can't win, then the people who didn't like the game they wanted to prop up can't have nice things either. I definitely think there's something to that. That's not going to work, and amusingly, they're just deepening their own defeat, because by trying to shackle Ghost to all these problematic labels, my side can now make the argument that says labels don't matter and don't affect sales, which is interesting. They're not consistent. So, well, yes, if it was a moderated, logical debate, yes, you could make that argument, but they'll just go, no, it's not, and move on like they always do. Then when I read these snarty articles, it's always in that voice, no, it's not. But yeah, I think anybody on the sidelines seeing this fight is getting to the point where, I know a lot of people who just like The Last of Us 2, and it's not because they have really any political thing in it. They're easy, they just want to be taken on a journey for a while, and they were just fine with all the railroading, and because they don't have the same expectations of a video game. They're totally fine with a game being an interactive movie, whereas I'm like, I feel like I'm in a time warp back in the year 2000 when when it's too cinematic and it's too railroaded. I'm like, no, I don't want to go back here. No, I like games that are games. And that's really, I think, where the divide comes down. Regardless of politics, there are some people that are great with interactive movies that call themselves video games. There are people like me where there has to be like meaningful gameplay. It doesn't have to be earth-shatteringly like innovative. It just has to be solid. And the thing about Ghost of Tsushima is it's not just that it does anything terribly innovative, though I think the wind pathfinding is the innovation in that game. That works astoundingly well and is not as easy to do as they made it look. But they did everything well. It's solid. It functions. The fast travel is actually fast. And that's an achievement in and of itself. And it's the thing where game critics don't reward a polished product the way gamers who pay money for a game do. And I think that really matters. There's really no right answer to interactive movie versus actual game, actual interactive narrative. But I'm going to offer my defense of interactive narrative as opposed to movie you play by pushing buttons. A movie is $12 up here. A video game is $80 up here. This is Canadian money, okay? So people are like, why is this so Canadian? Canada. If you want a movie, I expect to pay $12. So something like The Last of Us 2, if it was $40 and it was just a really long interactive movie, I'd have no problem with that. But for $80 I want a game. I want something I can interact with. You know, like you buy hockey equipment or baseball equipment or, you know, even basketball shoes. That shit's fucking expensive. But I play. I'm an active participant in that. I'm not somebody sitting being led around by the nose with no say in what happens. That's the difference for me. That's what justifies the price tag. I get to do shit. An interactive narrative is not a story that the developer is 100% in control of. A interactive narrative is a toolkit that the developer gives the player a really pretty package where the player makes their own story based on their decisions. And I am much more interested in games like, you know, I think Far Cry does it very well as well, that have an element of AAA emergent stuff where how you attack a fort is as important to the narrative, what your character did, what your experience is, as the dialogue-driven plot. I love that shit. I love that. That just makes me happy. I'm like, wee. Being led around by the nose by a narrative where I'm a passive observer instead of a participant in just doesn't excite me as much. So that's where I'm at. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I forgot to do Patreon. Patreon. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LanaK. Holy crap. That was me just hitting the wall. I have officially run out of gas. Okay, everybody have a great weekend. Thanks for watching.